second form of representation, which is the most commonly used, is transaction broker. So let's look at it. As a transaction broker, the company and its associates provides to you a limited form of representation that includes the following duties. So from the get-go here, you can see that the document itself says that it is a limited form of representation as opposed to a complete form of representation. Number 1, dealing honestly and fairly. Number 2, accounting for all funds. Number 4, disclosing all known facts that materially affect the value of residential real property and are not readily observable to the buyer. Now I skipped number 3 just to point out that these 3 here are actually the same duties as an agent who is in a no brokerage relationship. Number 3, using skill, care, and diligence in the transaction. As you can see, that obligation does not exist in the prior form of representation, which is a no brokerage form of relationship. Number 5, presenting all offers and counteroffers in a timely manner unless a party has previously directed the licensee otherwise in writing. Now this is interesting. In the prior form of relationship, it's not an obligation of the agent. So because they are not representing you in the no brokerage relationship disclosure, they actually don't have to present all offers. Number 6, limited confidentiality, unless waived in writing by a party. This limited confidentiality will prevent disclosure that the seller will accept a price less than the asking price or listed price, that the buyer will pay a price greater than the price submitted in a written offer, of the motivation of any party for selling or buying property, that a seller or buyer will agree to financing terms other than those offered, or of any other information requested by a party to remain confidential. Now obviously this offers you a lot more protection as a buyer or seller when you are represented by an agent who is a transaction broker. But again, the document does state that it is a limited confidentiality. So the things that are not listed here might not be confidential. Number 7, any additional duties that are entered into by this or by separate written agreement. What that means is that you could agree to other restrictions or other duties with your agent which are not included here. The limited representation means that a buyer or seller is not responsible for the acts of the licensee. Additionally, parties are giving up their rights to the undivided loyalty of the licensee. This aspect of limited representation allows a licensee to facilitate a real estate transaction by assisting both buyer and the seller. And I'm going to stop here because it does say assisting both buyers and the sellers. It doesn't say representing, because dual representation or dual agency in the state of Florida is illegal. But a licensee will not work to represent one party to the detriment of the other party when acting as a transaction broker to both parties. What that means is that the agent has to be fair to both parties. Now, for all practical purposes, here are the little challenges with this. Because the agent does not have to be loyal to you whether you are a buyer or a seller, then there is no expectation on your end that the agent is going to act in your best interest. Buyers and sellers have typically conflicting interests. The buyer wants to buy the property at the lowest possible price for the best terms. The seller wants to sell the property at the highest possible price for the best terms. Everybody's pulling in a different direction. Transaction broker can be in the middle. You could have one, you could have two, a buyer's agent and a seller's agent, or just a transaction broker that could be initially the listing agent or the buyer's agent going to a seller that is not on the market. Now the question becomes, can that transaction broker or those transaction brokers steer the transaction in one direction or another to the favor of one party and the detriment of the other party? The simple answer is technically not, because this is what it says. Let's read it again. This aspect of limited representation allows a licensee to facilitate a real estate transaction by assisting both the buyer and the seller, but a licensee will not work to represent one party to the detriment of the other party when acting as a transaction broker to both parties. So if there is one transaction broker between the buyer and the seller, and the buyer is pulling down on the price and the seller is pulling up on the price, the transaction broker is not supposed to favor either party, but the transaction broker is also typically being paid a commission, which is a percentage of the sale price. So the commission is higher if the price is higher. The transaction broker also wants to close the deal. So if the buyer walks away, there is no transaction, and typically if the transaction broker is between the buyer and the seller, the commission is higher because there is no buyer's agent. Can the transaction broker use the information to manipulate the transaction? The risk is absolutely there because it all depends on the integrity of the agent. Whether you are a buyer or a seller, transaction brokerage is a limited form of representation. There is no loyalty, and you cannot expect that the agent, your agent, is representing your best interest. Therefore, the transaction broker is really working as a facilitator who's going to make the transaction happen for both of you, seller, buyer, and themselves, to earn their commission. By now, whether you're a buyer or a seller, you clearly understand that transaction brokerage is a limited form of representation. There is limited confidentiality, no loyalty, and no obligation on the part of the agent to act in your best interest. So can they call you a client, or should you be called a customer? Let's take the example of attorneys. Attorneys have to obey the orders of their clients, but they also have to protect the information and everything that's shared with their clients in full. They cannot disclose anything unless their client authorizes them to do so. They also have the obligation to act in the best interest of their clients. So really, they do have clients. Transaction brokers don't have these obligations. So really, it's unfair and misleading to you, the public, that they call you a client if you're really not a client.